The chandeliers of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills glimmered like bottled stars. Crystal glasses sang in soft collisions. Laughter drifted through velvet air perfumed with wine and wealth. Every detail whispered perfection, the kind that money rehearses 1,000 times. Among the swirl of silk gowns and tailored suits moved Naomi Bennett, a quiet presence in black and white. Her steps were light, precise, her eyes steady, trained to see everything, to disturb nothing. In a room filled with people who owned the world, she carried herself as if she still belonged to one. At the head table sat Carter Drake, the billionaire CEO of Drake Nova Technologies. He was a man accustomed to control, of markets, of meetings, of the air itself. Beside him, investors and executives traded smiles worth millions. Across from him, the legendary Elliot Stone, 72, quiet as a storm gathering offshore, observed the world with the patience of a man who had seen empires rise and fall on a single choice. It was supposed to be a night of triumph. A $200 million deal, the merger everyone whispered about, waited to be sealed with a handshake and a toast. Every lens in the room was turned toward power. Naomi approached the table with a calm smile and a bottle of Bordeaux balanced between her fingers. She moved as if gravity respected her discipline. A soft clink, wine filling the crystal glass, rich and red, catching the chandelier's light like liquid fire. Then a slip, a single drop escaping, landing on Carter Drake's cuff. Tiny. Harmless. But in that instant, it became the crack that revealed everything beneath the polish. Carter's jaw stiffened. He looked at the drop, then at Naomi. And then, like a fuse meeting flame, his voice exploded. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." The sentence struck the air like a gunshot in a cathedral. Every laugh died mid-breath. Forks stopped mid-air. The jazz band faltered, a note hanging unfinished. For a heartbeat, even the chandeliers seemed to dim. The sound traveled through the hall, cruel, unmistakable, irreversible. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration, of how he saw her, of what he believed power gave him the right to say. Naomi didn't move. Not a blink, not a tremor. Her breath slowed, measured, deliberate, like someone learning to breathe inside fire. In her silence lived centuries of every insult swallowed by those told to serve and smile. She simply nodded once, and in that small motion was the quiet strength of 1,000 storms held back. Around her, the room turned witness. Phones tilted discreetly, screens glowing, recording. A young VP shifted in his seat, unsure whether to laugh or vanish. The air itself turned heavy, thick with shame no one dared to name. Carter adjusted his cuff link with surgical precision, as if erasing the stain could erase the moment. He gave a short, dismissive laugh, hoping to reset the night. But power had already changed hands. It no longer belonged to him, it belonged to every silent lens and every held breath in that room. Across the table, Elliot Stone set his fork down. No words, no visible anger. Just the kind of silence that carries more judgment than shouting ever could. He glanced once at Naomi, not pity, not shock, just understanding, and then back at Carter, who still didn't realize his empire had just cracked open. Naomi continued her work, pouring water, collecting plates, straightening linen, as though she hadn't just been wounded in front of 100 witnesses. But behind her calm, something shifted. She was not retreating. She was rising. The cameras caught it, the stillness in her hands, the refusal to break. The moment when dignity stood taller than money. And somewhere between that breath and the next, everyone in that hall understood a truth they would never forget. It wasn't the spilled wine that ruined the night. It was the sentence. A single, careless sentence that cost a man his crown, and lit the fuse of a story that would burn across the world. Because sometimes, a single sentence can cost you everything. The moment after the insult hung in the air like smoke. Every second that followed stretched, slow and sharp, the way silence sounds after thunder. 100 eyes tried not to look but couldn't look away. Naomi stood still, towel in one hand, glass in the other. Her breath shallow but steady. The insult still echoed inside her chest, heavy as lead, yet she refused to let it bend her posture. If she had been trained to serve power, tonight she would teach it something else: composure. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend herself to the man who had already decided she wasn't worth defending. Instead, she gave the smallest of nods, the kind given when you've just been struck but choose to stay standing. And then she continued her work. She placed the refilled glasses before each guest, precise as a heartbeat, her movements mechanical, but her silence? Deliberate. Because silence, in the hands of the dignified, becomes a mirror. And tonight, Naomi held up that mirror to every soul in that glittering room. Elliot Stone watched. The man known as the Silent Storm had built empires from observation. He read people the way others read contracts. To him, a gesture revealed more truth than a speech. And what he saw in Naomi's quiet grace was power unspoken, the kind that doesn't shout to be heard. Carter Drake, meanwhile, tried to pretend nothing had happened. He swirled his wine, laughing too loudly, leaning toward Elliot as if forcing normal back into the room. He cracked a joke about focus and control. "Winners don't get distracted," he said. But his voice trembled on the word control. He didn't realize that control had already shifted, from him to her. From his raised voice to her steady silence. Naomi moved behind him, refilling glasses in careful order. Elders first, assistants before bosses, investors before hosts, and Carter last. The hierarchy of service, a quiet rebellion in motion. When her hand reached his table again, Carter muttered under his breath, too low for most to hear, but sharp enough to cut. "Still learning your place, I see." Naomi's eyes lifted. "Come. Unbroken." "Yes, sir." "I understand," she said softly. And she slipped her wrist free from his grasp when he tried to hold it. No struggle, just precision, a refusal without violence. It was like watching a storm redirected by skill, not force. Some guests swallowed hard. Others set down their forks. Even those who didn't understand the full story could feel the atmosphere crack, the quiet horror of witnessing dignity being tested. Elliot Stone's fork touched his plate again, deliberately. The second time that night. A signal. His aide noticed and quietly stepped out through a side door, phone already in hand. No one else saw it, but that single subtle motion would alter the fate of millions. Carter kept talking about projections and ROI, but his words had lost their gravity. Every sentence floated away, lighter than air, unanchored by respect. Across the hall, screens glowed. Someone had already sent out the first message. CEO humiliates waitress at $200 million dinner. It was spreading. The digital tide had begun. Naomi didn't know it yet. All she knew was that her job was not over. And so she continued, steady hands, soft steps, eyes low but spirit high. She bent to pick up a colored pencil a little girl had dropped at the next table. A small act of kindness unnoticed by most, but Elliot saw it. He always saw the smallest details because they often told the largest truths. And tonight he saw more than an employee. He saw leadership wrapped in humility. Carter, on the other hand, saw only a servant he could control. When Naomi turned to leave, he whispered again, loud enough this time for the table to hear. "When grown men are talking, you stand still." That was the moment the room stopped pretending. A ripple of discomfort passed like an invisible wave. People shifted. One woman at the far end whispered, "Enough." But Carter didn't hear her. He was too busy proving he could still dominate the moment. Elliot leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the table. No emotion. Just patience, the kind that comes before a verdict. He turned his head toward his aide, who had just re-entered, and nodded once. The signal had been set. Naomi finished the final pour and stepped back, folding the towel across her arm. She wasn't a victim, not tonight. She was the line between power and integrity, drawn by her own hand. In that silent stretch of air, she became more than what her name tag said. She became the measure of everyone else in that hall. The band tried to resume, fingers trembling on strings. The laughter returned, but it sounded different, hollow, nervous. Because once dignity has spoken, even without words, the noise of arrogance can never quite fill the room again. Carter sat straighter, sensing the shift but unable to name it. He adjusted his tie, his cuff links, his pride, all the armor he had left. He didn't know that the night's true story had already changed authors. Elliot lifted his napkin, folded it once, and placed it on the table. A simple act, but to those who knew him it meant one thing: decision. A storm was coming, not of thunder, but of consequence. Naomi walked away from the table, face calm, back straight, her heart pounding but her soul intact. Each step she took was a declaration: you cannot humiliate the unbreakable. And behind her, the man who once believed he owned the room finally realized he had just lost it. Because power may speak loud, but dignity speaks last. Every calm soul carries a storm that once nearly drowned it. Naomi Bennett's storm began long before the chandeliers of Beverly Hills ever reflected her face. She was 8 when the world first taught her what absence sounds like. A car accident, a phone call, and then silence that didn't end. Her mother gone, her father already missing long before that, in body and in spirit. Foster homes followed like temporary shelters in a city of strangers. Each new house promised safety, but none offered belonging. And yet, even as a child, Naomi learned something vital: that survival isn't about noise or anger. It's about breathing quietly enough to hear your own heartbeat when the world stops listening. By the time she turned 11, Naomi had become the kind of child who made her bed twice. Once to stay busy, once to stay steady. She didn't speak much, but when she ran, she flew. The track became her first form of freedom. Her legs became the language her voice couldn't find. In the cheers of distant crowds, she found something that sounded almost like love. And then, Elliot Stone. He met her during a charity visit. He was older, gray at the temples, soft-spoken but commanding, a man whose words carried the weight of both compassion and consequence. His wife, Margaret Stone, had a smile that felt like sunlight after too many winters. When they first met Naomi at a small community center, Margaret had bent down, looked her in the eyes and said, "You don't have to be loud to be seen." It was the first time Naomi believed it might be true. Weeks became visits. Visits became weekends. And one evening, Elliot handed her a cup of hot cocoa that tasted like peace and said simply, "Would you like to come home?" Not a home. That night, for the first time in her life, Naomi slept without keeping her shoes beside her bed. She was 12 when Elliot and Margaret officially adopted her. The papers called her Naomi Bennett Stone, but Elliot told her quietly, "Keep your name. It's your history, not your shame." So she kept it, Bennett, the name of her past, the anchor of everything she refused to forget. For 5 years, the house on the hill filled with laughter, piano music, and the quiet comfort of shared dinners. Margaret loved to hum while cooking. Elliot would read financial reports in the same room just to stay near her. Naomi would sit at the kitchen counter, pretending to do homework but mostly watching the kind of love she had never known could exist. But the storm wasn't done testing her. Cancer came like a thief that didn't bother to knock. By the time Margaret's hair began to fall, Naomi had already learned how to hold the bowl and the silence. She was 17 when Margaret passed, leaving the house echoing and Elliot half broken. Grief made the walls seem larger, the rooms colder. But it also drew Naomi closer to her little brother Eli Bennett, Margaret's last foster placement before her death, a 10-year-old boy with cerebral palsy and eyes like dawn after rain. Doctors had said Eli might never stand on his own. Naomi refused to accept never. She learned every stretch, every brace, every therapy schedule. She taped charts on the refrigerator and calendars on the walls. She read every page of every medical note until the words blurred. And every night, before turning out the light, she whispered to Eli, "We're family. That means we rise together." Elliot watched quietly, proud but heavy-hearted. He saw in Naomi not just resilience, but calling. He offered her a position at Stone Holdings, his company, something safe, steady, respectable. But Naomi shook her head. "I don't want comfort. I want clarity," she said. "I want to see how power behaves when it forgets it's being watched." Elliot smiled faintly, recognizing in her words the kind of courage most executives lose somewhere between ambition and compromise. He didn't stop her. He just said, "Then learn. But remember, observation is also a form of leadership." So Naomi entered the world of hospitality, not as a career but as a classroom. She became a waitress at high-end restaurants and hotels, where every table was a study in hierarchy, every smile a disguise, and every order a lesson in human nature. Invisibility became her armor. When people don't see you, they reveal who they really are. She saw the polite cruelty of the powerful, the way some treated kindness as currency and others as inconvenience. She saw deals made in whispers, betrayals sealed in handshakes, and truths buried under laughter. And in those quiet corners, Naomi learned how to see character, not in speeches but in how someone treats the unseen. By day she served tables. By night she became a strategist of empathy, mapping patterns of behavior in notebooks only she read. She studied tone, timing, body language, not for gossip but for insight. To her, understanding power wasn't about taking it. It was about preventing it from destroying the wrong people. Meanwhile, her life outside those banquet halls was a patchwork of exhaustion and devotion. 2 jobs. 1 small apartment. Therapy appointments for Eli. Rent notices taped too early to the door. And yet, every night she'd smile at her brother as he tried to stand on trembling legs, whispering, "Again, Eli. Just once more. We count to 4 and we rise." That simple ritual became their anchor. Count to 4, then rise. He'd laugh when he fell and she'd laugh with him because laughter meant hope was still alive. Years passed and word of her discipline spread quietly through hotel corridors. She was the waitress who never forgot a face, never dropped a glass, never lost her calm. She was invisible, but respected. Unnoticed, yet indispensable. And in her invisibility she became dangerous. Because people who aren't seen hear everything. So when fate brought her to serve at the Four Seasons Beverly Hills, under the glitter of wealth and the illusion of perfection, she didn't come as a servant. She came as an observer of humanity. She came to study what happens when power believes it's unchallenged. And on that night, when a glass of Bordeaux slipped and a man's arrogance collided with his own reflection, Naomi's years of endurance, loss, and love had already prepared her for that exact moment. Because storms don't frighten those who have lived inside one. And silence doesn't break a woman who learned to rebuild her world from it. The dinner that began as a celebration of power had turned into a stage for consequence. The air inside the ballroom was no longer glittering, it was electric. Every camera lens, every whisper, every nervous glance, was pointed in one direction, toward the man who had believed he owned the room. Carter Drake straightened his tie again, mistaking silence for forgiveness. He leaned toward Elliot Stone, forcing a grin, trying to reset the script. Now, as I was saying, Elliot, post-merger synergies will. But Elliot wasn't listening. He had spent a lifetime watching markets rise and crash, men boast and crumble. He'd seen arrogance dressed as leadership too many times to mistake it again. His fingers tapped once against the table, the same deliberate rhythm he used when closing a deal or ending one. Carter noticed the gesture and chuckled nervously. Elliot, come on, let's not get dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. Elliot's eyes lifted, calm but cold. The kind of calm that comes before thunder. He spoke quietly, yet his voice seemed to carry through every corner of the hall. Before we continue talking about numbers, there's something more important we need to address. Carter blinked, unprepared. More important than $200 million? Elliot rose slowly. The movement itself was commanding, as if an invisible gavel had struck wood. Conversations halted. Glasses stopped midair. The band fell into silence once more. All eyes turned toward him. And then he spoke. Before we talk about partnerships, I want to introduce someone very important to me. Pause. Every head tilted, curious. Elliot turned slightly, eyes finding Naomi across the room. She stood still, hands folded, apron crisp, her heartbeat steady though the world felt like it was spinning. This is Naomi Bennett, Elliot said. She is not just part of the staff here tonight, she is my daughter. The sound that followed wasn't noise, it was disbelief turned into breath. Gasps rippled through the tables like a shockwave. Chairs creaked, glasses trembled, a few cameras zoomed instinctively. Naomi stepped forward, unhurried, head high, each step cutting through the thick air of judgment. She stopped beside Elliot, not behind him. Not as a waitress. Not as a servant. But as a woman now revealed in her full truth. Carter's face drained of color. His mouth opened, then closed again, like a man suddenly drowning in his own words. He stammered. Elliot, I didn't realize. No, Elliot interrupted softly. You didn't? And that's exactly the problem. He turned to face the guests, investors, executives, politicians, the watchers of the world who had just witnessed what power looks like when it forgets its humanity. Tonight, you all saw something that money cannot polish. You saw how a person in power treats someone they think is beneath them. And now you will see what accountability looks like. Carter reached out, desperate. Elliot, please don't make this into a scene. The scene, Elliot replied, was already made when you opened your mouth. The room went still again. Naomi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough, the living reminder that dignity doesn't need a microphone to be heard. Elliot's aide returned, phone in hand, whispering something into his ear. A headline was already spreading online. Stone Holdings pauses $200 million deal after public incident. The crowd knew what was happening, the shift was seismic. This wasn't about a business agreement anymore. This was about ethics becoming economics. Elliot looked at Carter one last time. I've spent my entire life building companies. I've made millions, lost millions, and rebuilt more than I can count. But I have never seen a balance sheet large enough to justify disrespect. He placed both hands flat on the table, leaning slightly forward. Stone Holdings is withdrawing from the deal. A collective gasp. The sentence dropped like a stone into water, silent, then rippling through every heart and phone in the room. $200 million, gone in a breath. Carter froze, a man watching his empire melt in real time. Elliot, this is insanity. No, Elliot said calmly. This is clarity. Across the ballroom, Naomi stood motionless, the quiet center of a moral earthquake. The same woman Carter had humiliated now stood beside the man who had just erased $200 million for her dignity. Phones lit up like constellations. Tweets, posts, whispers, spreading faster than the jazz band could even think to play again. Screens caught the image. Naomi standing beside Elliot Stone, Carter's glass of red wine untouched, the faint stain on the tablecloth glowing under the candlelight like a mark history would remember. Naomi bowed her head slightly, whispered to Elliot, "You didn't have to." He smiled faintly, eyes glinting with pride and sorrow. "Yes, I did. Because if I don't, then power wins. And I've seen what happens when power wins." Carter collapsed back into his chair, staring at the red stain spreading across the white linen, a perfect metaphor for the night. A single careless drop that revealed a lifetime of arrogance. As the guests began to rise, quietly, awkwardly, one by one they drifted toward Naomi. A few offered small nods, others simply looked at her differently, not as background but as the story. The last sound in the room before silence reclaimed it was the soft click of a camera, capturing the moment a fortune vanished and integrity took its place. That photo would travel across the world within hours. And the caption would read, "Dignity over deals." The night ended in silence, but by dawn the world was roaring. Headlines bloomed like fire across screens, $200 million deal destroyed in a single sentence. Dignity over deals. The CEO who forgot he was being watched. Within hours, Drake Nova Technologies turned from a symbol of innovation into the definition of disgrace. Investors didn't wait for clarification, they simply pulled their money. The stock graph bled red. Emails flooded the PR inbox faster than replies could be written. And somewhere in a penthouse office, Carter Drake sat staring at 20 unread messages from his own board. The video, 2 minutes and 31 seconds of unfiltered truth, had already reached 12 million views. No commentary needed. Just the sound of his own voice saying, "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." And then the look on Naomi Bennett's face, the calm that shamed a kingdom. The PR team tried everything. Draft A, "We regret the misunderstanding." Draft B, "We apologize for any offense caused." Draft C, "We take full responsibility." None of them worked because you can't edit morality after it's gone viral. By noon, #DignityOverDeals had reached 40 countries. In cafes, offices, classrooms, people watched and whispered. Not about finance, about humanity. The clip became more than a scandal, it became a mirror. Every company, every boss, every employee who'd ever felt unseen saw a reflection in that room. In boardrooms across the city, statements were being rewritten. Zero tolerance. Inclusive culture. The same phrases that had once been PR slogans were now survival plans. Inside Drake Nova's headquarters, panic was methodical, like an orchestra tuning for disaster. Executives met behind glass walls, eyes hollow, voices hushed. A crisis consultant spoke in bullet points. "We need accountability. Immediate. Suspend the CEO before markets open tomorrow." Carter pounded the table. "You think throwing me under the bus fixes this?" The chairman's reply was cold, almost merciful. "Carter, this isn't about fixing. It's about stopping the bleeding." At 11:47 p.m., the vote was unanimous. Carter Drake suspended indefinitely pending review. Security badges deactivated. Email access revoked. The man who once controlled a billion-dollar empire couldn't open his own office door. He walked out through the same lobby where employees used to greet him with nervous smiles. No one looked up this time. Power had a new face and it wasn't his. Meanwhile, Naomi Bennett was miles away, unlocking the door to a small apartment that smelled faintly of lavender and late-night coffee. Inside, her brother Eli waited on the couch, a blanket around his legs, TV remote in hand. When she walked in, he grinned. "You were on the news," he said softly. "Everyone's talking about you." Naomi smiled, setting down her keys. "Not about me, Eli. About what matters." He nodded, then asked the question children always ask when adults are shaken. "Are you okay?" She sat beside him, pulling him close. "I'm okay," she said. "Because I didn't lose anything worth keeping." Eli laughed. "You always say that when something big happens." Naomi brushed his hair back. "Because it's always true." Outside, the world was a storm, notifications, interviews, outrage. Inside their small apartment, there was stillness. The kind that only love and exhaustion can build together. Naomi's phone buzzed again, hundreds of messages, thousands of mentions. Journalists wanted quotes. Activists wanted her voice. Brands wanted her story. She turned the phone face down. She'd learned long ago, silence can speak louder than applause. Instead, she helped Eli through his nightly stretches. counted to 4 with him, 1, 2, 3, 4, and smiled as he held his balance for an extra heartbeat. That single second of standing was worth more than all the chaos in the world. At Drake Nova, that same second felt eternal. Inside the corporate war room, 7 screens glowed. One showed trending hashtags. One tracked stock prices plummeting. Another scrolled live comments. She didn't even flinch. Respect is the real currency. Dignity shouldn't have a price tag. The board had already replaced Carter with an interim CEO. Someone known for damage control, not innovation. But damage control doesn't work when the damage is moral. Every interview, every headline circled back to the same name, Naomi Bennett. Some called her a symbol. Others called her a revolution in heels and quiet grace. But Naomi didn't see herself as either. She saw herself as a sister who had to keep going, bills to pay, a brother to care for, and now, a world accidentally watching. By morning, protest had begun outside Drake Nova's glass tower. Employees held up signs that read, "Respect at work is not optional." And pinned across 100 lapels was a small white ribbon with the words #dignity over deals. At Stone Holdings, Elliot watched the footage silently, tea cooling beside him. When his aide asked if he felt vindicated, he shook his head. "No," he said. "Justice doesn't feel good. It just feels necessary." He knew the headlines would fade, the hashtags would cool, but that moment in the ballroom, had cracked something open that would never fully close again. That night, Naomi tucked Eli into bed. He yawned, half asleep, and murmured, "Was it scary?" She paused before answering. "Yes," she whispered. "But being quiet when you should speak is scarier." The moonlight fell across her face, the same calm composure she'd worn in that ballroom, now softer, more human. Her phone vibrated again, one last message before sleep. A stranger on the internet had written, "You didn't shout. You didn't fight. You just stood there. And somehow you changed everything." Naomi smiled faintly, then turned off the light. Outside, the world still buzzed with outrage and analysis. But inside that small apartment, one truth settled like dawn over tired hearts. Money may build towers. But respect builds legacies. And in the quiet glow of a nightlight, Naomi Bennett finally closed her eyes, not as a waitress who had been insulted, but as a woman who had reminded the world that even in chaos, dignity is undefeated. The world had already named her, the woman who stood silent while power fell apart. But Naomi Bennett never asked for a title. She didn't want to be a symbol or a headline. She just wanted the world to learn what her mother, her brother, and life itself had taught her, that dignity isn't a slogan. It's structure. And now, Elliot Stone was giving her the chance to build that structure. The morning light poured across the skyline of Stone Holdings, reflecting off the glass walls like the city itself was waiting for her. Inside, the 32nd floor conference room was filled with quiet expectation. Executives in crisp suits shifted in their chairs, uncertain what to say to the woman who had, without raising her voice, reshaped a conversation the world was now having. Elliot Stone entered first, his presence as calm as ever. He motioned toward the seat beside him, not across, not behind. Beside. "Naomi," he said softly, "it's time." She sat, notebook in hand, pen steady between her fingers. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. "You're not here as a gesture," Elliot began. "You're here because this company, and every company like it, needs to learn how to protect the very thing that money can't buy." He slid a folder across the table. On it, embossed in silver letters, were 4 words. Director of Corporate Humanity. Naomi stared at it for a long second, feeling the weight of what it meant. It wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility, to make dignity more than a headline, to make it operational. She nodded, eyes glinting with quiet conviction. "If dignity was broken in public," she said, "then the repair must be public too." That afternoon, Naomi sat in her new office, smaller than Elliot's, larger than any she'd ever imagined for herself. The window overlooked the city. Cars moved like veins of light, people like flowing data, all part of a vast, living network, each one deserving respect. On her desk lay a blank page. Across the top, she wrote 3 words in capital letters. Listen. Illuminate. Renew. Then she began to design something the business world had never seen before, the Dignity Index. A system to measure what truly matters. Not just profits or growth, but respect. It would track employee retention, complaint response times, inclusion scores, and leadership accountability. Every number, every ratio would tell the story of how humans were being treated. No filters. No excuses. When she presented the prototype to Elliot, He leaned back, eyes soft but impressed. "You've turned empathy into architecture," he said. "Now let's see if people can build on it." 2 weeks later, Stone Holdings announced a live global address, Naomi Bennett's first as Director of Corporate Humanity. The message invitation was simple. "Yesterday I was silent. Today I choose to speak." Across the world, employees tuned in, from San Francisco to Singapore, Berlin to Austin. Factory workers paused their shifts. Engineers pulled up the stream between code reviews. Night shift janitors huddled around small screens. Everyone was watching. In the studio, Naomi stood alone before a camera. No teleprompter. No script. Just truth. She took one deep breath, the same rhythm she taught Eli. Count to 4, then rise. And then she began. "Yesterday," she said softly, "I was called stupid. Not because I made a mistake, but because someone believed their title made them more human than me. Yesterday I stayed silent, not out of fear but out of focus. Because silence, in that moment, protected what shouting would have destroyed." Her eyes lifted to the lens, steady and warm. "But today, I choose to speak." The words echoed through thousands of screens. She continued, her voice calm but unshakable. "There is a difference between power and leadership. Power can demand. Leadership must earn. Power silences. Leadership listens. And from this day forward, Stone Holdings will choose leadership." A quiet murmur spread through the viewing offices around the world. Not applause, not yet. Just stillness. Listening. Naomi outlined the 6 commitments of the Dignity Program. Stop work authority. Any employee witnessing a dignity violation could halt operations without fear of punishment. The Dignity Index. Quarterly public results on culture, respect, and accountability. Partner clauses. Any partner who violates dignity loses their contract until repair is made. Whistleblower protection. 24/7 anonymous hotline with zero retaliation. Listen, pay, or repair. Offenders must face those they hurt, complete training, and participate in measurable repair. Mandatory leadership certification. 40 hours of training for all managers, failure resulting in withheld bonuses. Then she paused, looking directly into the lens. "If you manage people, you are responsible for how they feel under your authority. Respect is not an expense. It's the foundation of every sustainable company on earth." The chat beside the live stream exploded. Finally, someone said it. "She's rewriting leadership. This is what change looks like." But Naomi didn't smile. This wasn't a victory speech. It was a declaration of duty. She finished with quiet gravity. "One act of arrogance cost this world $200 million. But one act of dignity can build a culture that no market crash can erase. From today we count differently, not only in profits but in respect." Then a pause. No music. No closing credits. Just Naomi breathing in, calm, certain. "Yesterday I was silent. Today I speak. And tomorrow, I listen." Across continents, the moment resonated. In Singapore, a manager stopped mid-meeting and turned to apologize for cutting someone off. In Los Angeles, janitorial staff clapped softly after their shift. In Berlin, engineers printed the phrase "Dignity is operational" and taped it to a whiteboard. And somewhere, in a dark apartment, Carter Drake sat before his laptop, replaying Naomi's words over and over again. The same man who once saw power as control now saw it as confession. He pressed his palms together, whispered into the silence. "She's right." When the broadcast ended, Elliot met Naomi in the hallway. He didn't congratulate her. He didn't need to. He simply asked, "Are you ready for what comes next?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Yesterday was the storm. Today we build the shelter." And as she walked away, the entire floor seemed to stand a little taller. Because for the first time in a long time, leadership didn't look like a man behind a table. It looked like a woman who had turned pain into purpose, and silence into a movement. Weeks had passed since the meltdown, but for Carter Drake, time had not moved forward. It had circled him. Every morning he woke to the same silence, the same faint hum of a city that no longer spoke his name with respect. His empire was gone. His calendar, once stacked with meetings, interviews, and power lunches, was now an empty grid of white. No calls. No investors. Only reminders from lawyers and articles that refused to fade from search results. He had tried to outrun it. Tried to tell himself the world had exaggerated, that people forget, that headlines move on. But every night, the same clip replayed in his mind, his own voice dripping with arrogance. "Don't touch me, you stupid black girl." It was the echo that wouldn't die. And the silence that followed it, Naomi's silence, was louder than his entire career. One morning, as he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by unopened letters and unanswered emails, his phone buzzed. A message. Just one sentence. Redemption begins with repair. Elliot Stone. Attached was a link to the new Listen, Pay Your Repair program. Carter read every word twice. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a framework, empathy written into action. Participants were required to confront what they'd done, listen to those they'd harmed, and serve time, not in prison but in humility. For a long time, Carter stared at the screen. Then quietly he clicked apply. The application didn't ask about net worth or status. It asked questions that scraped the soul. Describe the harm you caused. Who was hurt and how do you know? What part of yourself are you ready to dismantle? Carter had spent his life writing to impress. Now, for the first time, he wrote to confess. When he pressed submit, it felt like exhaling a decade of denial. Days later, an email arrived. Accepted. Orientation begins Monday. Signed, Naomi Bennett. He stared at her name, unsure if he deserved even that acknowledgement. The first day of the repair program wasn't glamorous. There were no cameras, no reporters. Just a community center on the city's south side, walls lined with donated books, coffee brewed strong enough to taste reality. When Carter walked in, every face turned toward him. Some recognized him. Most didn't care. They were teachers, nurses, delivery drivers, people who had seen far worse than arrogance. At the front stood Naomi. Composed. Come. She looked at him, not through him. Mr. Drake, she said softly. You're not here to be forgiven. You're here to learn what forgiveness costs. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Understood. Naomi continued addressing the group. This program isn't about punishment. It's about presence. You can't repair what you refuse to see. So for the next 6 weeks, we'll start with listening. Carter's assignment was simple and brutal. 3 days a week, he'd work at St. Mary's Shelter, serving meals to families who had lost everything. No cameras. No PR team. No redemption tour. At first, it felt impossible. The apron itched. The trays were heavy. People didn't recognize him, and when they did, they didn't care that he used to be powerful. But slowly, humility started doing what success never had. It made him human again. One afternoon, while cleaning tables, he saw a young boy drop his food tray. The boy froze, waiting for anger. Carter knelt down, picked it up, and said softly, "It's okay. I used to spill worse things." The boy laughed. Something in Carter's chest cracked open. Not guilt, grace. Naomi visited occasionally, not to praise, not to test, but simply to observe. One evening, she found him sweeping floors after everyone else had left. She stood quietly in the doorway watching. "Why are you still here?" she asked gently. Carter looked up, sweat on his forehead, eyes tired but clear. "Because it's the first time I feel useful." Naomi nodded once, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. "Then you're finally starting to understand." She walked closer, her tone calm but firm. "Redemption doesn't erase what you said, Carter. It teaches you why you said it." He swallowed, voice breaking. "I didn't hate you. I just thought power meant superiority." "It doesn't," she said. "It means responsibility." By week 5, Carter's transformation had stopped being a process. It had become a practice. He'd begun mentoring younger men in the program, sharing his story not as a cautionary tale, but as living evidence that accountability is possible. During one session, a participant asked him, "What's the hardest part of losing everything?" Carter thought for a long time, then answered quietly, "Realizing I didn't lose it. I gave it away, every time I chose pride over respect." That night, he walked home under a quiet sky, no driver, no entourage, just a man learning how to walk like everyone else. The program ended 6 weeks later. Naomi stood at the podium during the closing session. Dozens of participants filled the seats. Carter sat in the back, hands folded, no spotlight. "Repair," she began, "isn't about saying sorry. It's about rebuilding what broke, in others and in yourself. It's not a public performance. It's private work repeated daily." She paused, scanning the crowd. Her gaze met Carter's for the briefest moment. "True redemption," she said, "begins in silence, not in the spotlight." Carter lowered his head. For once he didn't feel shame. He felt peace. After the session, as people began to leave, he approached Naomi slowly. He extended his hand, not with entitlement but with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not for forgiving me, but for not letting me hide." Naomi shook his hand firmly. "Keep learning," she said. "Because redemption is never finished. It's practiced. He nodded, tears just behind his eyes. Then I'll keep practicing. That night, as Naomi left the center, the city lights shimmered against the horizon. The same skyline where arrogance once stood tall, now softened by the glow of reflection. And somewhere in that vast city, Carter Drake swept one last floor before locking up for the night, his hands rough, his heart finally light. Because power can be taken. Money can be lost. But redemption is earned in silence. Change doesn't happen in boardrooms first. It begins in whispers, then travels like light. What started as a single act of courage in a hotel ballroom had now become a worldwide movement. Within a year, the Dignity Index was no longer a Stone Holdings initiative, it was a global standard. Companies from Tokyo to Toronto began measuring success not just by quarterly profit, but by how people felt walking into work each morning. In a quiet conference room in London, an HR director presented a slide deck titled, Human Sustainability Metrics. It wasn't about energy or waste. It was about respect. And at the top of the first slide was a name everyone now recognized, Naomi Bennett. The Stop Work Authority clause, once considered radical, had become policy in more than 60 corporations. If anyone, from janitor to executive, witnessed a violation of dignity, they could halt an operation instantly, no permission needed, no fear of retribution. At first, analysts predicted chaos. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Productivity rose. People worked harder for leaders who treated them as equals. Turnover dropped. Sick days declined. Empathy had become efficient. Naomi and her growing team at Stone Holdings led the movement like architects of a new era. They built programs, drafted charters, trained thousands of managers. Every week, her inbox filled with stories from around the world. Our CEO apologized to a janitor in front of the entire staff. A factory line stopped so a worker could comfort a colleague. We used your dignity clauses to fire a supervisor who bullied quietly. Each message reminded her why she'd begun. Every one of them echoed the same belief. Leadership is no longer about power, it's about presence. Elliot often told her, "You haven't created a policy, Naomi. You've started a civilization of conscience." But movements are always tested. And change, no matter how vast, always circles back to a single moment of choice. It happened during a partner summit in Singapore, a gathering of hundreds of companies now committed to the Dignity Index. Naomi sat on stage beside global executives, her calm composure unchanged, her words still measured, her tone gentle but sure. A young intern walked by, carrying a tray of water bottles. One partner, a CEO from an allied firm, snapped his fingers impatiently, spilling a bottle and muttering, "Watch where you're going, girl." The sound froze the air. History, it seemed, was daring to repeat itself. But this time, Naomi didn't have to stand. She didn't have to speak. Across the hall, a mid-level manager from Brazil, a man Naomi had trained months earlier, rose from his seat, voice calm but firm. "Stop the session." The audience went silent. He turned toward the CEO. "You just violated Stop Work Authority." Security paused, unsure. Naomi simply nodded. The rule was clear: dignity before delivery. The broadcast cut briefly while the room held its breath. And in that silence, 1,000 memories of Naomi's first humiliation seemed to echo, but this time the ending was different. The CEO looked around, realizing the world had changed while he wasn't watching. He stood trembling and whispered, "I'm sorry." No applause followed. No dramatics. Just understanding. The kind that comes when a culture finally learns what respect costs, and why it's worth everything. Later that evening, Naomi sat by the hotel window, city lights glimmering beneath the clouds. She watched the skyline and smiled softly. It was happening, not in headlines but in hearts. Elliot called from New York. "You heard?" he asked. "I did," she replied. Someone pulled the brake. And? Naomi looked out at the glowing world she'd helped rebuild. "It means the movement no longer needs me to protect it," she said quietly. "It's protecting itself." Somewhere across the ocean, in a conference room filled with nervous executives, a sign hung on the wall, 5 words that had reshaped in age. Dignity over deals, always. The chandeliers of the Four Seasons Beverly Hills gleamed again. The same glass, the same walls, the same air, but this time the light felt different. No longer blinding with power but warm with purpose. The ballroom that once trembled under arrogance now stood reborn as the stage for the Operational Dignity Summit. A global gathering of leaders, workers, and visionaries who had turned one moment of cruelty into a movement of conscience. Naomi Bennett walked through the grand doors not as a server, but as the keynote speaker and architect of change. The staff at the entrance greeted her with respect that needed no words, the kind of reverence that comes not from title but from legacy. Elliot Stone stood beside her, cane in hand, pride in his eyes. Age had softened his stride but not his strength. "Feels strange being back here," he said quietly. Naomi smiled. "No," she replied. "It feels right. The place didn't need to change. We did." Inside, the summit had already begun. Hundreds filled the hall: executives, students, custodians, waiters, CEOs, teachers. Every table carried the same name tag: equal participant. On stage sat 4 chairs: Naomi, Elliot, Rosa Alvarez, a factory foreman from Mexico City, and Jamal Lee, a former janitor from Atlanta now managing a regional team. They weren't symbols, they were stories. The moderator began with polished enthusiasm. "Today we celebrate how far we've come. The Dignity Index has reshaped over 80% of global operations. This is progress in motion." Applause rippled. But Naomi knew the real work wasn't in the numbers, it was in the people who had lived them. Rosa spoke first. Her voice carried years of labor and laughter. "I used to think leadership was about giving orders," she said. "Now I know, it's about giving oxygen." The room fell into stillness, listening. Jamal shared next, eyes shining with quiet pride. "At my old job, people used to talk over me. Now, when someone forgets to listen, the team reminds them, 'Hey, count to 4, then rise.'" A wave of warmth moved through the audience. These were no longer slogans, they were habits reshaping human instinct. Then came the twist. A young woman from the audience stood to speak, a logistics coordinator from Nairobi, flown in to share her story. She began nervously, voice trembling. "I'm honored to be here. But I still see places where." The moderator cut in, smiling politely but firm. "Thank you, we're short on time. Let's move on." The sound of dismissal sliced through the air, sharp, familiar. The same arrogance now wrapped in professionalism. And before anyone could exhale, Naomi raised her hand. "Stop work." The room froze. It was the same phrase that had once halted an empire. Now it stopped a summit. The moderator blinked, startled. "Ms. Bennett?" Naomi's voice was calm, steady. "You just silenced someone. That's a violation of operational dignity. We stop. We listen." Every camera turned toward her. No anger in her tone, only principle. The young woman's eyes filled with tears, not from shame but from recognition. Naomi gestured gently. "Please, finish your thought." The woman nodded, gathering courage. "I just wanted to say that in some factories the policies exist, but the empathy hasn't arrived yet. Sometimes we need leaders to visit the floor, not to inspect but to understand." Applause filled the room, not thunderous but warm, collective, human. Naomi turned to the crowd. "This," she said, "is what change looks like. Not perfect, not polished, just practiced, again and again until respect becomes instinct." When the summit ended, Naomi walked through the same hallway where her silence had once been recorded. Now, every step echoed with dignity instead of fear. Reporters tried to stop her for comments, but she only said one line as she passed. "Real change doesn't live in speeches. It lives in everyday habits." Outside, the sky was golden, the same sun, the same city, but a different world. And as she stepped into the light, Elliot caught up beside her, smiling softly. "Full circle," he said. Naomi nodded. "No," she whispered. "Just the next beginning." The ballroom was empty now. The banners had come down, the applause had faded, and the chandeliers above whispered softly in the quiet. Naomi stayed behind, helping the staff fold chairs and gather name cards. A simple ritual she refused to give up, a reminder that no one is ever above service. As she reached for a stack of chairs, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Still the last one in the room." She turned. Carter Drake stood near the doorway, no entourage, no arrogance, just a man carrying the weight of his own lessons. He wore no suit, no title. Only humility. For a long moment they said nothing. The space between them was filled with everything that words could not repair: pain, growth, recognition. Carter took a cautious step forward. "I heard the speech," he said quietly. "You turned a mistake into a movement." Naomi looked at him, her gaze steady, kind. "No," she said softly. "People did. I just refused to look away." He nodded slowly. "You changed the world." "No," she replied again. "The world changed itself, when it finally listened." There was no handshake, no apology, no absolution. Just two human beings standing in the ruins and rebirth of what had once broken them both. Then Naomi picked up another chair, folded it, and smiled faintly. We keep cleaning, Carter. That's how we build again. He watched her go, not as a rival, not as a savior, but as proof that redemption is real when humility leads the way. Later that night, Naomi returned home. Eli was waiting, standing in the living room, his braces locked, trembling, but upright. Look, he grinned, breathless. 5 seconds. Naomi laughed, eyes shining. She counted with him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He fell into her arms, laughing. On her desk, an open notebook waited. She picked up her pen and wrote. Dignity is operational and habitual. She paused, looked out the window toward the city lights, and whispered, let's hope the world keeps practicing.